So today I'm going to start by doing a reading, and the reading is actually something that Rose Zink wrote for this service. We've thought about a lot of different things when we put the service together. Thought, oh no, we don't have a minister, what are we going to do? And it ended up being me, but it started out being a bunch of people, and I thought that it would be nice to share this with her, this thing that she wrote, because it does end up matching the thing that I put together. So this is what she writes. We consider this building to be our sacred space. The foundation, the walls, ceiling, roof, windows, floors, viewed separately, have no meaning. It is the sum of its parts that make it a church and our spiritual home. But there are more utilitarian items that contribute to our comfort in this space. There's air conditioning, heating, running water, copiers, printers, computers that are the unsung parts of our church, necessary, but not considered sacred. It is the same with the service. The congregation gets to participate in the final production. We come, we worship together, we have coffee or lemonade, and we go home. But in order for this to happen each and every Sunday, there are groups of volunteers committed to providing a spiritual experience to be shared by all. Some of the committees can be considered the ones to provide the spiritual content of a service, like worship. Others can be perceived as necessary, but not spiritual. Both must come together in a way that contribute to making our church a home. For example, the hiring of an RE director, a musical director, even a short-term minister might seem more like business than something uplifting. But RE teachers are vital to a thriving congregation because this is a person who will plant the seeds of spirituality for the next generation. As a structure needs a foundation, so do our children in learning the tenets of the UU faith. We have survived without a music director, yet I'm sure no one will disagree that our spiritual journey is greatly enhanced with music as a regular part of our service. There are members of our congregation who would like to share the gifts of their musical abilities in a more interconnected manner. A musical director would provide the bridge between a choir and the congregation, providing hymns and choral arrangements. And of course, there's the hiring of the short-term minister who reflects the vision of the UU SMC and helps us make a journey together. The process for adding these vital parts to our church may not seem spiritual, but in the end, results woven into the tapestry that is our sacred home. They're as vital as awakening to love and sharing our collective care, as sharing our collective caring and compassion is with one another. All right, so that's what Rose wrote. So I think we're moving on to me. I will do my best to be fast. I might be a little bit long here, and I'm going to just try. So basically, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about General Assembly. Anybody here, by a raise of hands, has anybody here been to the UUA General Assembly before? All right. Ooh, we got such a crowd. Okay. All right. So every year, Unitarian Universalists come together. Is this working? Am I right? Okay. Every year, Unitarian Universalists come together in June to meet at a General Assembly, where we conduct business of the association, explore our faith, and lean fully into our mission and principles. Our 62nd General Assembly took place June 21st through 25th this year, virtually and in person in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Around 2,000 delegates participated in the business of the association, representing around 1,000 congregations. And just so that you can understand how large a part this is of our UU faith, there are 200,000 registered members and non-members in 2023 for the UUA. So that means 2,000 out of 200,000. That's 1%. But the congregation, it's depicting us. It is a certain percentage. One of the most important parts about the 2023 General Assembly was its vote on changes to the UUA bylaws. When I heard that nobody from Mill Creek had planned to attend the assembly and that our congregation would consequently not be a part of this important democratic process, I volunteered to be the delegate. The part of our bylaws that's under review, now this is the part that's a little intense, okay? It won't be long, I promise. The part of our bylaws under review are Article 2, which are the principles and purposes of the UUA. I mean, that's not nothing. I have included, I originally was going to print out a copy, but I didn't get them made. I thought they'd be made for me. I have a copy of these, and I'm going to send them out on Monday. I'm going to send out on email all of the information, okay? So you can look at it, or you do not have to. This is for those of you who are interested. The current Article 2 is a part of our bylaws that has the 7 principles and the 6 source materials. Have you guys heard of those? Okay. Current bylaws require us as a group to review the purposes and the principles at least every 15 years and to present possible amendments that better define the faith in the context of the present day. This is what makes UU a, quote, living faith tradition, as we do not accept the utter sanctity of even our own past words. Last year, the General Assembly voted to set up a committee that would review Article 2 and make proposed changes to it. The UUA Article 2 Study Commission came up with a draft, I know, it's kind of funny, of the revised Article 2 in January. This spring, UUA members had the opportunity to recommend amendments to this revision. So if people read it, they could say, oh, I don't like that, try this, try this. Then the UUA Article 2 Study Committee chose about 15 amendments from among those suggestions, and then at the 2023 General Assembly, we had to vote on whether to accept or reject the amendments to the revision. It was a democratic process with opportunities for people in person and online with pro and con positions to express their opinions. 5 out of 15 of the amendments passed, and the January 2023 draft was revised to include those changes. Then the General Assembly this year had to vote to determine whether or not there would be a vote to accept this revision in 2024. I know that's fairly complicated, but basically we voted on the amendments, and then we had to vote whether or not there should be a vote next year to decide whether we should change. So we just voted to decide whether there was going to be a vote. Isn't that just sort of a UU thing to do, right? Okay, we're not going to get too fast. Oh, that's not mine, good. It's my same ring, so I was like, oh, who's calling me? Okay, where was I? I'm sorry. Voting. All right, here we go. So I also have I'm going to send you a copy of the revised version, too, on Monday. So the revision hoped to address criticism of the current Article 2 by including a greater emphasis on the support of human rights and commitment to action based on the values associated with the 7 principles. The revision clearly states the UUA's commitment to dismantle racism and build inclusive communities. So for the last 15 years, we've been trying to figure out what to do about this 8th principle, this racism part. Like, do we add it at the bottom of these principles, or do we change everything? And that's part of what's being addressed. But here's the thing that's interesting. So rather than focus on 7 principles, the new bylaws put love at the center of our principles. A love that informs 6 core values. And if you guys have your order of service, this little very complex diagram is the 6 core values, including interdependence, pluralism, justice, transformation, generosity, and equity. The revision also removes the list of specific sources of inspiration, so there are no more 6 sources, as a way to address concerns about which sources get included. Everybody was fighting over what to put on the list, so they said, let's just get rid of the list. Instead, it states that sacred, secular, and scientific sources inform our values and ground us and sustain us, which I think is actually more how we do things anyway. There is so much we can talk about in relation to this proposal. But when Kathy asked me to talk about my experience at GA, she really didn't want me to just state facts. She wanted me to talk about how it affected me spiritually. So now I'm going to shift and talk a little bit about how this experience affected me. But I did feel like I had to at least tell you a little bit so that you knew what was going on. And it was kind of important for our faith. Since General Assembly was in Pittsburgh, and I have a dear friend there, I let the board know that I would be willing to serve as a delegate for our congregation. This was particularly important as our congregation hadn't sent a delegate to GA for the past few years. And I think Kathy and I talked about it. It might have been since 2017. When I eventually decided I didn't really have the time or the resources to travel to Pittsburgh, I agreed to represent our congregation virtually. So I went to the virtual conference. General Assembly 2023 was not the first General Assembly that I attended. In 2017, I chaperoned a group of 12 youth from my former church to General Assembly in New Orleans. The experience was incredibly uplifting. I traveled thousands of miles to an exotic city. But when I walked into the convention center, I felt like I was home. All the people we met were friendly, and their passion for our faith was clear. There were amazing programs. The youth participated in a variety of activities for teens. Chloe, I went with my daughter. Chloe and I also participated in a choir of about 100 people. We got to see Brian Stevenson speak about racial injustice in the United States. We helped put together bags of reusable feminine protection items to be distributed to people in poor places that had no access to menstrual supplies. We met and spoke with many people advocating for easier inclusion of disabled people in UU congregations. One of the highlights was the first evening's banner parade. Representatives from each UU congregation that attended held a banner with the names of their congregation and the place, and then marched through the main assembly hall. Seeing the various names and locations of the congregation fill the large space was for me, like a visual symbol of UU's pervasive presence across the country. I mean, the number of congregations in red states is astounding. It was moving. The whole experience at GA was like being part of a giant hug for 4 days. I left feeling spiritually filled and inspired to make a difference. I also left thinking I would definitely like to attend General Assembly again someday. The 2023 General Assembly I attended virtually was a far different experience. First of all, I remained home, and I had many obligations that made it impossible for me to devote all of my time and attention to GA. By coincidence, our monthly board meeting occurred the same week as GA, and we were busy figuring out how to hire a minister. I did attend 4 out of 5 of the business meetings. That's 19 out of 22 total hours in business meetings. I missed the last meeting because it was the same day as Greg's final service. So you can see it was just a really hard time. They do have a lot of opportunities for me I could have done a lot of really interesting, but I just couldn't. So I couldn't do the fun stuff. I just kind of had to do the work stuff. Rather than attending workshops on my spirituality, my experience of GA 2023 was being present at daily 2 to 3 hour business meetings. During these meetings, a variety of information was presented to delegates about what various UUA groups were doing and what had accomplished this year. We also discussed amendments to Article 2. We discussed a business resolution to divest UUA investments from the fossil fuel industry. And we reviewed 3 different actions of immediate witness regarding militarizing the police, healthcare equity, and DACA. Of course, for me, discussing mostly involved me listening to a variety of speakers share their knowledge and opinions about the subjects at hand. It was sometimes difficult to pay attention as new information came my way rapidly, and I needed to understand what was said and the context of the situation. I got to hear speeches, and I even got to watch several musical performances on the main stage. The music was incredible, but the cameras were aimed on the speakers and performances, not on the audience. There were many people present in the audience in person, and between 200 and 1,000 of us were in the Zoom meeting. But it was hard to feel their presence. You know what it's like online. We chatted together, everyone was friendly and helpful, but it wasn't the same as being able to look around and see us. The experience was more abstract. One of my favorite parts of GA, the banner parade, was not available online. Frankly, my second experience was far less enjoyable than my first experience. The first GA I attended, I was inspired and entertained. Yes, I was there as a chaperone, but the experience offered me much more than I put into it. It was spiritual play. My experience at the first GA reminds me of how I felt when I first started attending UU churches. At that time, I attended the services and pledged yearly, but I did not commit to any significant obligations. I was, as one interim minister once described it to me, a consumer. And going to church was something like going to the movies. As I became more committed to my first UU church and subsequently Mill Creek, my experience with church became more complex. Those of you who are involved know exactly what I'm talking about. Yes, I still get so much out of the service, the sermon, the music, and the connections I make with everybody at coffee hour. But like Dorothy, seeing the wizard behind the screen, it's no longer simply magical. I recognize the work that it takes to prepare and present Sunday services, to care for the building and property, and make sure that we are financially stable. My second experience at GA reflects my current relationship with Mill Creek. There were stirring words and beautiful music, but it was also a lot of work. I had to sit through hours of meetings and listen very carefully to what was presented so that I could do my best to cast a vote for the choice I thought best reflected our congregation. My second experience at GA was also sometimes confusing and uncomfortable. My initial reaction to new information was honestly and embarrassingly sometimes reactive. I don't like to consider myself a reactive person, but for example, the organizers of GA have made a commitment to make the conference as accessible as possible to everyone participating. As part of that, everybody who spoke introduced themselves by name and with a physical description. So this is what they would say. My name is Fran Gulino from Unitarian Universalist Society of Mill Creek in Newark, Delaware, on the land of the Lenape. I am a 57-year-old large white woman with a winning smile, wearing a maroon dress and glasses. I use she, her pronouns. For me, this felt incredibly awkward at first, and it really distracted me from what everybody was saying. I kept thinking about why people were using the descriptors they did and why they might not include them. For example, some described themselves as fat or cis or balding, but then did you have to, or were you supposed? It was very interesting to me. Others didn't mention it. Some gave their pronouns, but others said they responded to any pronouns. Were those who responded to any pronouns being sincere or cheeky? I looked over this array of good, earnest folk. I mean, everybody there was great. And I couldn't help wondering what this might look like from the outside. I just kept thinking of my dad watching and going, some sort of conservative parody of a liberal community. There was part of me that felt that way. I had to remind myself that I thought it was very important that GA should be accessible to everybody and that it was inclusive. I had to let go of my first, surprisingly visceral reaction in order to be open to the changes and challenges these folks were asking of me. I had to let down my guard and accept our awkward attempts to do right by each other as part of the learning process of being in beloved community. In addition, my own uninformed position about the changes going on with Article 2 were challenged. Often I shared the opinions of people who wanted to make changes to the revision that would dilute the power of the new Article 2 in order to preserve some of the things that they personally loved about the original words. For example, many delegates suggested the 7 principles be retained in a subclause as a nod to our tradition. That seemed reasonable enough to me at first. Our general principles have been important to me personally, and it's just a really easy way to kind of keep track of what you're supposed to do in community. However, other delegates who did not support the inclusions explained why they opposed the amendments, that the current Article 2 text made them feel left out and didn't go far enough to support our commitment to action in the greater world. This was a point of view that I had frankly never considered. It was somewhat bewildering. I could see that there were all kinds of subtext going on, but I was not familiar enough with the participants to know what they were. In general, it felt like there were folks that wanted to hold on to our traditions and other folks that wanted to change everything. For me, it often seemed like they were arguing over small differences, like a couple of words, but I could see that there was more to the interaction than just those 2 words. So by the end of day 4, I had to vote on whether or not to accept Article 2 by 9 p.m., but my head was spinning. Before I made any decisions, I thought that I needed to take a step back, a little break, and decide what I thought was best for us later. I needed to fully engage with all those thoughts to feel confident about how to vote for you. Luckily, I had that opportunity. Just 1 hour after Saturday's General Assembly of the Delegates concluded, Mill Creek's Pride service was taking place. I felt that it was more important to attend our grassroots service than to participate in the final night of GA activities. I honestly, sorry guys, I wasn't looking forward to going. I already spent a significant part of my day dedicated to church business. I had a headache, and my attention span was non-existent. But I wanted to show up and support the folks that had organized this activity because I wanted them to feel not just tolerated, but embraced as a part of Mill Creek's congregation. Thank goodness I did that. After spending 3 hours online in a virtual committee meeting, I went home to Mill Creek. The service was everything that my experience at GA this year was not. It was in person. It was intimate. It was us. But its message seemed familiar. That every person be accepted for their authentic self. That hope that our religious community would be a safe place for LGBTQ plus people to reside, and that members of the congregation who were not LGBTQ plus would be staunch allies here and outside the world. Coming home to Pride service made me see how I ought to vote at GA. What these LGBT plus folks were doing at Mill Creek on Saturday was a microcosm of what the activists were trying to change the UUA were doing at GA. They wanted to be known, heard, and accepted. I hadn't failed to notice that most of the people who spoke in opposition to the revised Article 2 at GA were older white men. They did not want to give up the traditions and the words that they had become accustomed to. Or they thought the new words were less poetic or precise than the older words. Or they were concerned that the new amendment is less clear about what sacred and spiritual texts we really use as our sources of information. All of these are valid concerns. We might worry, what if these new changes are a mistake and make UU somehow less amazing? What if they make it less familiar to us? After the Pride service, after giving myself time to sit with the proposals and to consider the opposing views, I came to the following conclusion, which I shared with other delegates on the chat. I love the words of our current bylaws. It's hard for me to see them go. Words are important, but actions are more important. Currently, UU seems more diverse than it did. Doesn't it make sense for those of us in the greater UU community who have historically had more power in the faith and in the larger community act in a way that shows we are willing to give away some of our beloved traditions and words to stand together with those of us who don't feel represented by them? For the last 15 years that I have been UU, I have followed the 7 principles as a roadmap to being part of a beloved community. I will admit that some of the changes do not seem as pithy as the ones that I have become familiar with. But I can see that the original 7 principles and the amended version continue to reflect the overall essence of what I love best about this faith. I believe it is important for me to sit with my discomfort, to challenge what it is that I feel I have possibly lost before I reject it. In the end, that is what our faith as UUs asks us to do. The Article 2 revision came out of a demand from youth and underrepresented peoples to have the UUA bylaws reflect a commitment to action in the greater world, especially to healing historic injustices and transforming the world through love. The revision specifically mentions the importance of inclusion, not only in affirming that our congregations are welcoming, but also in insisting that our congregations together be a force to empower and enhance the participation of everybody, especially those who have been historically marginalized in the greater community and in UU congregations. With this in mind, I decided to vote for the Article 2 revision to be considered in 2024. General Assembly 2017 was inspiring and fun. I came away feeling like part of a bigger community of amazing people, just like me. Just like I felt in the first days that I visited Mill Creek. General Assembly 2023 wasn't as much fun. It had to listen more than I spoke. I had to be willing to compromise and give up some of the things that I wanted. I had to be patient and resist the impact to react to things that made me uncomfortable. Sounds a lot like how I feel sometimes at Mill Creek board meetings. My experiences at both GAs were important to me. Neither one was better than the other. They both reflect that important part of being in beloved community. Feeling connected to and inspired by others is really important. Feeling understood and loved is everything. But it also feels great to work hard to accomplish something, to do my best to make decisions to improve the lives of our beloved community. As part of the 2023 General Assembly, I got the opportunity to be part of the living faith tradition of the UUA. And this opportunity will continue for all of us into 2024. Revisiting and rethinking our bylaws offers the opportunity for every generation of UUs to grapple with who we are and to have the opportunity to shape our faith community. We don't just get to share our faith traditions with those who come after, but we get to be humble and gracious enough to accept their alterations to our faith, trusting that the spirit of our living tradition will continue to live on. What other faith can say that?